Luigi's Mansion 3 has finally come out. I'm gonna be honest with you, I've had mixed feelings towards this game ever since it was revealed. While I was surrounded by people who were really excited for it, I was more so cautiously optimistic. The reason is easy to guess if you're familiar with my channel, or more specifically my reviews of the previous Luigi's Mansion games. I love the original on Gamecube, but Dark Moon didn't live up to the original. Now, don't get me wrong, it is far from a bad game. In fact, I'll say it is good. But there were a lot of things about it that didn't really work as well, most of which had to do with it being a 3DS game. Not to mention the complete change in tone and atmosphere from the original. Now, I was mixed on Luigi's Mansion 3 because as a fan of the original, I of course want to see more games, but also as a fan of the original, it was a bit concerning given how this game looked to be more like Dark Moon. But you know what? I'm going to be a bit more optimistic going into this game. Even if it won't recapture the same tone and atmosphere that made me fall in love with the first game, I should still give it a fair shot. Plus, since it's on Switch, it won't be held back by the 3DS's limitations. Even if it's the Dark Moon style, it could improve a lot on it. So let's get right into this. For this review, I recorded 2 separate playthroughs of the game, the first being my first time playing the game at all. Figured that to be as fair as possible, it would help to have a second playthrough so it isn't just a glorified first impressions. Both playthroughs were 100% in everything other than achievements. With that out of the way, let's start with the story. There will be spoilers for the entire game as well as previous games. The game starts with Mario, Luigi, Peach, and 3 Toads in a bus heading to the shiny hotel as they had apparently been invited. Oh, and the Polterpup is also here. The atmosphere is very welcoming. You see these banners with each of the characters' faces there, but only one of the Toads. And there's sweets and presents all over. But given that this is the 3rd game in this series, pretty obvious that all is not as it seems. And the game doesn't even attempt to hide it. The staff are obviously poorly disguised ghosts, and the place is named The Last Resort. Subtle. There's a nice touch here where if you stand near one of the staff, Luigi will look freaked out. Even he seems to think this is odd. But then we are introduced to the owner of this hotel, Helen Gravely, who greets everyone and shows them to their rooms where they get a good night's rest. That is until Luigi is woken up by Peach's scream. So apparently the ghost redecorated his room but didn't capture him, even though, as we'll find out, everyone else was captured. Alright then. So Helen Gravely is a ghost and set this trap up. The reason being that she's apparently a big fan of King Boo, who she had freed from captivity. Luigi escapes through a laundry chute, and after wandering around the basement for a bit, he finds this old-timey car which conveniently has a brand new poltergust model in it. He explores a bit more of the hotel with his new suck machine in tow and finds that Professor Egad has already been captured. It doesn't take long to free him. After that's done, they go to the basement, but notice most of the elevator buttons have been removed, and that the ghosts have them. Egad sets up this portable lab down here. It's a good thing he brought this with him, but it's explained that Egad was also lured here much the same way, but all his ghosts were freed as well. So at this point, Luigi makes his way up the hotel, exploring each floor to find more elevator buttons, while also searching for the Toads, Mario, and Peach. Nothing of note really happens plot-wise until the end, although we are introduced to Gooigi, which Egad made to help him catch ghosts. He was technically introduced in the 3DS remake of the first game, where future Egad sent him back in time, but the dialogue here implies this is the first time Luigi has seen this. And I'm content knowing that his inclusion in the first game is not canon. I seriously didn't like that. But as for the end, after finding and defeating Helen Gravely, Luigi frees Mario. And this is a cool section that I wish they did more with. Luigi wants Mario to head back to the lab, but Mario, being himself, obviously wants to help Peach, so he leads the way to the top. And you can see the difference between the two of them, at least within this series. Mario moves how he does in the platformers, jumping over gaps while Luigi needs to shimmy across them, and wall jumping up this tower while Luigi needs to find another way up. It's a bit short-lived, though, as King Boo had recaptured Egad and the Toads and manages to catch Mario and Peach as well while missing Luigi. I think it's a missed opportunity to not have Mario also be free and able to help Luigi against King Boo here, but oh well. After King Boo is captured, the hotel collapses, and the jewel on his crown breaks, which pacifies the ghosts who no longer have a home, so everyone decides to build a new hotel for them. Now the story is just as simple as the stories in the previous games, but if I'm being honest, I think this is the weakest of them all. The first game, while having a simple story, made it much more interesting by having a lot of mystery to it. You didn't know what happened to Mario, or who the villain was, or what his motive was, and you slowly learn more as you progress through the game. Mystery really lends itself well to a horror-like atmosphere. While this game isn't horror, it still has that kind of atmosphere. That's where the first game has an advantage over 3. 3 completely lacks any kind of mystery. There's no mystery to who the villain is since they show that it's King Boo right away. There's no mystery to the motive since it hasn't changed from the previous games. King Boo still wants revenge. There's no mystery to how King Boo managed to escape since you're told very early on it was Helen Gravely who did it. You have it all figured out right at the start. There's no mystery to what happened to Mario and the others because they show you. Now Dark Moon also lacked mystery since it also reused King Boo. We already knew what the motive is since it's the same from the first game, and it reveals that Mario's captured pretty early so we know what happened to him. But Dark Moon at least pretended to have some kind of mystery in that Luigi and Egad didn't know about King Boo being here, or that Mario was captured. Now, I did have a bit of an issue with Dark Moon for showing Mario and King Boo the way it did, and I will say I guess I prefer that 3 just gets it out of the way and doesn't have the repetitive dialogue questioning who could be behind all this. But the issue with 3 is that there's an empty void left in the story that the 2 previous games didn't have. The first game had the mystery. This mystery kept you invested the entire time, even if nothing was happening in the story. There's also the Game Boy Horror, where you could scan stuff to get Luigi's thoughts on things, as well as read descriptions for all the various ghosts. 3 doesn't have any of that. And Dark Moon had the interactions with Egad. There were frequent scenes of just dialogue with Egad, and while I found it to be rather pace-breaking at times, most of it was well written, and thus it still filled the void left by not having the mystery. I know someone who looks forward to these scenes in Dark Moon, and 3 doesn't have that. So because 3 has no mystery to it at all, and has far less dialogue, there really isn't much of anything to keep you invested in the story. After Egad is safe in the bunker, well, the story stops until you get to Helen Gravely. The only other real event, I guess, is when Egad sends a Toad to get some component to upgrade the Poltergust, and you have to go save him. But there really isn't much to that. To look at an example outside of Luigi's Mansion, to get an idea of how this void could be filled, there's Paper Mario. That game is separated into chapters. Each chapter had its own small story. Luigi's Mansion 3 is also separated into sections. Each floor is something unique, but only in terms of aesthetics and mechanics, not in terms of the story. To give another example outside Luigi's Mansion, it's the difference between Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus and Sly 2 or 3, where the first game had each mission being to get a treasure key, while in the next 2 games each mission was something unique that contributed to the story. Each floor is find the ghost with the elevator button and catch it, much like how in Sly 1, each mission was get to the end and get a key. The only sort of exception is in Paranormal Productions, where instead of catching Morty here, you find his megaphone and take part in his movie. But this is the only time something like this even happens, and even then it's not super interesting. It only is pretty cool because it's alone. I think it would have been much better if the other ghosts talked. Now these ghosts do have more personality than anything in Dark Moon because of their unique designs, how they move and act, and the locations they inhabit being reflective of their character. But if they had dialogue, that could have been the thing to fill this void. Now, most of these guys do more than the average portrait ghost from the first game, but again, we had the mystery aspect to keep you invested regardless. And they did have the advantage of not only because a few of them actually talked to you, but you could scan each one to get some dialogue, and each one had a short description about them. This game lacks that. You can look at them in the gallery, but there's no descriptions for them. This is something even Dark Moon had for its standard ghosts. But let's talk about the characters, starting with Luigi. The first game had an excellent portrayal for Luigi, and Dark Moon added even more personality, although it went a bit too far in making him cowardly, but otherwise was pretty good. Luigi's Mansion 3 portrays him pretty similarly to Dark Moon, but him being cowardly is toned down a bit. There are still a few moments where he jumps in fear of weak ghosts, but not nearly as much. Though there are some rather annoying moments where if you were in control you could easily resolve the situation, but because it's a cutscene, Luigi just sits there and lets the ghost walk away, very slowly I might add. So Luigi gets this button taken away from him, and when he gets it back, he insists on holding it up so it can get taken again. And then after retrieving it for the second time, he holds it up again. Did you learn nothing, Luigi? But aside from some slight annoyances, there's still a lot of charm and personality with how he acts. I love how when he saves Egad, he just wants them to leave now. But Luigi is the one who insists on staying to save Mario and the others. That's perfectly in line with how he was in the first game, and he has more agency than in Dark Moon, where he was just following Egad's orders. Since he knows Mario and the others were captured, he has personal stakes in this, unlike in Dark Moon, where it was primarily Egad's problem until they found out Mario had been captured. But I find Helen Gravely to be a bit disappointing. She's the new villain, but all she is King Boo's minion who doesn't do much after setting the initial trap. She is the one who set King Boo free and made the hotel, but those are the most significant things she does, and it's before the game even starts. There are a couple cutscenes where she is watching Luigi make progress and gets mad about it, but she doesn't do anything, just commands some normal bottom tier ghosts to go, even though at this point she should know they keep getting defeated. Her motive is just she's a big fan of King Boo, and that's kinda it. She's not trying to find something, or seek power, or get revenge, or anything else. Just likes King Boo and wants to join him for some reason. There isn't even much to the Master Suite where you find her that tells you more about her character, because it's all dedicated to King Boo. All we learn about her is she's obsessed with King Boo. The only other part to her character is, I guess she's also a bit obsessed with her appearance. There's like a lot of this powder on the floor leading to where she is, and when she gets angry, this happens to her face, and she uses the powder to get back to normal. But there's not much to this. Although there is one thing kinda cool about that. She has a ghost cat who also changes into this monstrous form when flashed. So they both have that as a connection. But that's about it. I think Helen could have been a lot more interesting if she was the main villain and had her own agenda. You could still implement King Boo if it's a necessity, like we've established multiple people can be stuck in the same painting. Maybe Helen could have captured King Boo in a painting and also put Mario in that same painting, so if Luigi wants to save Mario, he would also set King Boo free. Just an idea. She needed to be much more interesting than just a King Boo fangirl. If she was more of her own character with unique motives, that could have been the thing to fill that void, but she isn't. It's such a shame. As for King Boo himself, well, let's just say I think he was the best in the first game. He was so menacing in the first game, and in Dark Moon he was less interesting, but he at least kept some of that menace. I have a much harder time taking him seriously here, though. This whole trap was made to catch everyone, and he doesn't waste time getting Mario, Peach, Egad, and the Toads, but when it comes to Luigi, he just leaves him be so he can have his dramatic reveal. You'd think by the third time he'd learn to stop messing around and get the job done. Maybe this wouldn't bother me so much, except he actually seems pissed off that Luigi is making progress. In the previous games, you could argue he was overconfident, which is why he seemed to be messing with Luigi. And in the first game, he's shown to be afraid of the poltergust Luigi has. At least it's implied King Boo's working on other stuff in the background in Dark Moon, like gathering crystals to enhance the ghosts or setting up to open this paranormal portal. But here, he is only trying to catch Luigi, and he does nothing about it, while getting upset when Luigi is making progress. Why don't you do something to stop him? He kept his cool in the previous games, while here he gets visibly angry. Perhaps that could be what they're going for. The more times he fails, the more frustrated he gets. But it's a tad irritating when it's obvious he has this frustration, but doesn't really change his tactics. I just think it would have been cooler if he went out and tried to do something about you. Maybe at certain points he could appear and you weren't able to fight him because of his crown protecting him or something. So you just have to avoid him until the end where Egad finds a way for you to get rid of his crown. Either that or Mario, who wouldn't have been recaptured at the end, could help remove the crown during the fight, which lets you attack him. Just some ideas that could add some spice. But I think my biggest issue with King Boo is his dialogue. Something about it just doesn't sit well with me. What do I mean by vengeance? Glad you asked. I'm trapping you and everyone in your little vacation party in frames. Oh, and there's one more frame, of course. I saved it especially for you. Stay right there and put on your best terrified face, Luigi. This is game over. That's an awful lot of words to just say he's gonna put Luigi in a painting, something King Boo is already known for doing, making it rather redundant. His speech in the first game was so well written and gave us a lot of insight on his character and motives, which were previously unknown because of the mystery. But here it's just reiterating what we already know, without really adding anything. As for the rest of the cast, there's not a whole lot to go over though. These are already mostly long since established characters, and they act like they always do. Only interesting thing to talk about when it comes to Mario is when you free him, he jumps into action to save Peach, but that is perfectly in line with his character anyways, so it's not that surprising. But still cool to see it in a Luigi Smashing game, as the game is usually over when Mario is rescued. Though as I said, I wish they did more with it. But Mario still acts like Mario, Peach still acts like Peach, and the Toads still act like Toads. EGAD also hasn't changed much from Dark Moon, although he's much less of an asshole, and it's funny seeing him out in the field for once, even if it's short-lived. Alright, that's enough of the story. I know right away this review seems like it'll have a bit of a negative tone, but not to worry, things do get better from here. Visually speaking, this game is more in line with Dark Moon than the first game. I'll say it again, I still prefer the much darker atmosphere of the first game, but this game has pretty much perfected the Dark Moon aesthetic. As much as I want another game with that same atmosphere the first game had, I can't deny that this game is just plain gorgeous. Dark Moon looked good for what it is, but now we don't have the 3DS limitations, and they took advantage of it. The thing that got the most glow up are the animations. I love when Luigi gets startled, he stiffens up, or how he reacts to the disguised ghosts in the intro, as I pointed out before. And the facial animations are great. Everyone here is super expressive. I love the different expressions EGAD gives when you flash him or use the vacuum on him. And Luigi celebrating a victory is always joy to witness. Although one rather odd thing is Peach has a neck. Not just a neck, a really long one. Look at this thing, it's weird. Although since this game has less story than Dark Moon, there's less cutscenes, which means you see less of the great animation. So that might be a bit disappointing to some. But anyways, the environments are very detailed with much more destructibility than I expected. Now you'd think, since the entire game is in a hotel, that the theming would be more unified like the first game. But there's a lot of variety. Each floor has a different theme to it. And while there are some stuff like the desert floor or the grass floor, like Dark Moon, it does some more interesting stuff with the themes rather than it just being a New Super Mario Bros. Level. Okay, I do say that, but those two floors are pretty much the only ones like that. Most of the floors are based on stuff like a mall, a movie studio, a gym, and a dance hall. It is a bit odd that all this stuff is even in a hotel, but also there are these weirdly themed floors. I mentioned the garden suites and the Egyptian floor, but also a medieval castle and a pirate-themed area with a small ocean and pirate ship. Like, what is this all doing in a hotel? Not that I'm complaining about this, mind you, I do like these floors. But I can't help but feel it could have been cooler if these were specially themed suites with rooms that made sense being in a hotel, but themed accordingly. Although I guess the garden suites and the twisted suites are just that. Just would have been nice to see a bit more though. At times, this feels more like a museum than a hotel. It doesn't help that there's literally a museum on one floor. What hotel has a dinosaur exhibit? Again, I don't really have an issue here. I appreciate the variety. Just it would have been nice to keep the hotel theming across all floors. If there's any issue I have with the visuals, it would be the lighting. Not that it's bad, but I wish it could get darker. Yeah, I know that's my inner Luigi's Mansion 1 fan talking, but the lighting and shadows were so good in that game. Imagine what it could have been like here if they tried going for that look again. In the Scarescraper, something that can randomly happen is the power going out, and it gets really dark. I wish it could get this dark in the main game. They'd have to make the flashlight better, but it would have been nice for the flashlight to have more of a purpose anyways, since as it is, it's so bright the flashlight does not help you see better at all. Light is supposed to stun the ghosts, but it's so brightly lit in here. Now for the ghost designs. They are also more in line with Dark Moon than the original, although they do feel a little more sinister than the Dark Moon ones. If only by a little. They are still goofy looking, but not quite as goofy, like comparing the greenies to the goobs. Greenies are much more goofy. These red ghosts remind me of this guy from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Smash Blue! That's my boy! It's still hard to take them seriously, just not quite as hard as Dark Moon. They do have personality, but with less cutscenes, you don't see it as much. That's not really an issue since most of the personality now goes to the boss ghosts. These boss ghosts are pretty much portrait ghosts from the first game. They each have a unique design and personality that adds a lot of character to not just the area they are found in, but the game as a whole. Really glad to have these guys back, though as mentioned before, I miss the descriptions they had in the first game, and wish more than just Morty would talk. But from just the visual aspect, I don't have an issue with them. And lastly, with the ghosts, the boos, they still don't have the same transparency effect as the other ghosts for some reason, but at least they look a little better than Dark Moon. As for the soundtrack, it's also pretty good. I still prefer the tone of the first game, with it being more horror-like and the synthy sound to it, but I don't really have anything to complain about this. It's more in line with Dark Moon's soundtrack, which isn't a bad thing. The soundtrack in that game was good too, though I think I prefer this game's main theme. Unlike the previous games, each area isn't a remixed version of this main theme. Now, I did like how they did that, but it's nice having more original pieces throughout the game. Not that those first two games only had one track, but you get what I mean. The Grand Lobby is different from Mezzanine. Which is different from the hotel shops. There's nothing quite on the same level as the first game's Dark Hallway theme, or Dark Moon's Library Piano, but it's still got some great tunes. This is probably my favorite version of EGAD's Lab. Dance hall is pretty good too. And so is the Twisted Suites. I love the Boiler Works theme. We've also got some good boss themes. But I think my favorite track is, funnily enough, the Scarescraper menu theme. There's not much else to say. Pretty good soundtrack. I might even say it surpasses Dark Moon. Not to put down that game's soundtrack, but this one has a bit more. Library Piano is still amazing though. So as for the gameplay, the first two games played pretty differently from each other in nearly every aspect. As I've made clear before, I love the way the first game plays, but had quite a few problems with Dark Moon. So which of the two does this game more so align with? Well, it draws from both of them in many aspects. Let's start with the controls. First improvement over Dark Moon: no run button. Thank you. For some reason, Dark Moon had a run button even though the 3DS had a circle pad, so having a button to better control your speed was unnecessary, but they removed it here. Although one slightly annoying thing about movement is when you start moving, you'll be a little slow, but after a few seconds you'll start running. Not sure why you can't just always be moving at top speed, but it hardly affects anything. During combat, you do move at top speed at all times, so it's only when going in a straight line with no enemies where it might be a tad annoying, and even then only if you're impatient. There is one situation where this actually presents a real problem, but it isn't within the main game, but I'll get into that much later. Otherwise, this is a straight upgrade. Another thing that's just flat out better than Dark Moon is aiming. In Dark Moon, you didn't have a second analog stick to aim, so instead you had a button to point up. But now we're on the Switch, so you bet they took advantage of that second stick, and it feels so much better to be able to aim properly. Although it's not quite as smooth as the first game, aiming side to side is a lot slower, so you'll have to point the stick in the direction longer than you think you would need to. Just nudging it won't get you anywhere. And also once you start moving, your light will reset to in front of you, so you can't point it up and keep it up while moving unless you hold up on the stick. Which means if your aim is off just by a little, you'll need to put a lot more effort in readjusting. Now, there's not as much of a reason to do that in this game, so it's not really a problem. And even with the slower aiming, it doesn't really have an effect on the game, but the first game still has the better controls, if only slightly. So it's not long into the game where you get the newest Poltergust model, the G00. It's not all that different from the previous models, but it has some extra bells and whistles. It still sucks and blows, as always, and this is a really powerful vacuum. It can suck up just about anything, which is pretty satisfying with the amount of destructible stuff around. Anyways, if you push both at the same time, you will do this burst that makes you jump slightly. This will blow ghosts away from you, blow away obstacles, and allow you to dodge certain attacks. Now the flashlight still works like how it did in Dark Moon. We still have the strobe bulb. I didn't like the strobe bulb in Dark Moon because it slowed down the pace of combat. Instead of just shining the light on the ghost to stun them, you need to charge the light to flash them, which is slower, obviously. But it also makes it a bit awkward to hit the ghost with it if you miss because of the cooldown you go through every time you use it. Pretty much all of my complaints about it in Dark Moon apply here as well. The dark light also returns functioning exactly like it did before. You use it to uncover invisible objects, after which you still need to suck up the spirit balls. I still don't think they add much, but that's just a nitpick. One improvement is it no longer overheats, so you could just use it as much as you want, which is appreciated. And the last main attachment is the suction shot. You shoot out a plunger that can stick to certain surfaces. Once it's stuck to something, you can use the vacuum to grab the rope attached to it and pull back or slam whatever you're holding onto. It won't stick to just anything though. It can be used to stun ghosts, but mostly it's used to rip off panels or break open objects. Now all these functions are on the face buttons, which makes it a bit awkward to use while aiming. However, they are also mapped to the shoulder buttons, R for the strobe bulb, L for the plunger, and both at the same time for the dark light. This allows you to use them and the right analog stick at the same time, which is very helpful and makes the strobe bulb much better here, even if I'd still prefer not having it. It can be a bit awkward using the dark light, as trying to push both L and R can result in you using one of the other functions, but it's very minor annoyance at worst. It's still much better than using the face buttons. In fact, I think it would just be better if they weren't on the face buttons at all, because the dark light button is the same as interacting with objects or going through doors, and even if you use the shoulder buttons for it, it will still interact with stuff you're close to. Again, very minor inconvenience. It's not all that common, nor does it really get in the way much, but still it was unnecessary. Also, when the game teaches you these functions, it tells you about the face buttons, not the shoulder buttons, even though they are much better. I wouldn't be surprised if people didn't know about pushing both L and R for the dark light. I only found out by watching a video that talked about it. There is one more upgrade to the Poltergust though. Luigi. He's not just restricted to a tacked on co-op feature. Well, there is co-op and the second player is Luigi, but he can be used in single player. In fact, you need to use him. By clicking the right stick, you bring him out and now you control him. Clicking the stick will swap control back to Luigi, but to put Luigi away, you double click the stick. Luigi controls exactly like Luigi, but there are a few differences. He has less health, but you can regenerate health. And even if his health is depleted, he just goes back to Luigi where you can bring him out again. Water will also instantly dissolve him. Now for what he can do that Luigi can't, he can go through bars and grates, which is about it on his own. Though if you're using the vacuum and switch to Luigi, Luigi will keep his suck going. This also works in reverse. Not a whole lot of use in combat outside of a few exceptions, namely bosses, but I'll get to that much later. Overall, you have quite a few tools, which makes you quite versatile, at least when it comes to exploring. Combat, however, doesn't quite benefit much from all this. Much like the previous games, the combat involves stunning the ghosts so you can suck them up, but each game handles it differently. Let's get a refresher on how the previous games handled it to get the full context. In the first game, ghosts would spawn in like this. Before this, they aren't actually in the room. If you can't see them, they don't exist. After they land a hit, or you stun them without catching them, or they break free from your suction, or just wait long enough, they'll disappear and you'll need to wait for them to spawn back in. To stun them, you simply need to shine your light on them. Now, how long they stay stunned is determined by how close you are. If just the edge of your light's range touches them, they will instantly disappear. But if you're point blank, they will stay stunned for far longer. You can turn off the flashlight to more easily get in close. Once you stun them and start sucking, you get into a sort of tug-of-war match with them. They'll move around dragging you with them. To deplete their health, you need to pull in the opposite direction they're moving. But in order to do the most damage, you can repeatedly tap in that direction. But you risk losing hold of the ghost when not pulling back. Catching ghosts is pretty fast, and because of how quickly you can stun and catch them, that meant they could be pretty aggressive. Things can get pretty hectic with a lot of ghosts. The Hidden Mansion in the 3DS version really shows how challenging this combat can get by rearranging the ghosts, and that it takes a lot of skill. Now in the original version, it never gets all that hard, but it still remains that its combat mechanics are pretty technical and require a bit more skill than what was in Dark Moon. Now Dark Moon slowed things down. First off, in order to stun the ghosts, you need to flash them with the strobe bulb, which is slower than simply pointing at them, and with the cooldown you get from missing, that means the ghosts were far less aggressive. There was less skill in stunning them because of their reduced aggression and the range of the flash when charging. You just needed to be pointing vaguely in their direction to get them. Not to mention, the range had no bearing on how long they stay stunned. Plus, they don't despawn like in the original. Instead, they'll be invisible, and you can still flash them if they are in the way, which isn't an issue per se. You can use the dark light to find them without just blindly flashing, but because of this more defensive tactic, that obviously means they're less aggressive. The actual tug-of-war was less technical. Tapping back won't do anything but waste time. Instead, you hold back to fill this meter where you can do a charge suck to deal a lot of damage. Here the skill doesn't come from actually dealing damage, but more so holding on long enough to drain huge chunks of their health. It's a bit more defensive. You also had this jump to avoid other enemies for the few times they try to hit you, again because of the reduced aggression. Though it does drain your meter, so there's a bit of risk versus reward there. So basically, the original game's combat was fast and technical, while Dark Moon was slow and streamlined. And unfortunately, Luigi's Mansion 3's combat is much more in line with Dark Moon's combat. It pretty much takes nothing from the original aside from the improved controls. Once again, you use the strobe bulb to stun them, but sucking them up is a bit different. In the previous games, you just automatically get them in the tug-of-war when you start sucking. But here, that won't happen until the ghost's tail is physically in the vacuum. Now, if you're too far away to start the tug-of-war, they'll still be pulled into you and it deals a small amount of damage, but you're gonna need to get up close to do any real damage. The actual tug-of-war is similar to Dark Moon's in that you hold back instead of tap back to fill a meter. But the meter isn't for a charge suck, but rather a slam. Once the meter is full, you can repeatedly slam the ghost into the ground, dealing 20 damage for each one. If you deplete their health with a slam, they just disappear. It still counts as them being captured, though. If you use up the entire meter before the ghost's health is empty, you will let them go and have to stun them again. A couple strategies is to keep pulling back until their health is low enough, then slam. Or right before your last slam, you let them go, and the ghost will stay on the floor for a second, letting you get them again. Now, slamming ghosts not only hurts the ghost you're slamming, but it can hurt other ghosts if you hit them. And even if you don't hit them, if you're close enough, the ghosts will cancel any attack they might be doing. And that's basically all there is to the combat. You don't get any upgrades to the slam like you got upgrades for the charge suck in Dark Moon. You also can't dodge attacks in the middle of a suction like in Dark Moon, although slamming ghosts into other ghosts kind of makes up for that. It's also a lot harder to catch multiple ghosts at once because the ghosts need to physically touch the vacuum. It can happen, but it's not nearly as often as previous games. although you can catch more than 3 at once, unlike Dark Moon. As fun as slamming ghosts into each other and furniture is, and I hate to say it, I think the combat might be even worse than Dark Moon's. I have a friend who adores Dark Moon, and even he said he couldn't believe he'd say its combat would have been better than 3's. Hell, I can't believe I'm saying that. At least in Dark Moon, there was skill involved in managing your meter while avoiding enemies to deal the most damage. But here, once you start slamming, pretty much nothing can hurt you unless you're really not paying attention. You know, this game really reminds me of that Ghostbusters game from 2009. Or as I like to call it, the true Ghostbusters 3. I mean, Luigi's Mansion by default had some Ghostbusters vibes, and that game had some Luigi's Mansion vibes, so we've kind of gone full circle here. In that game, to catch ghosts, you need to deal enough damage to them to get a capture stream on them. After that, you had to slam them around to stun them so you can get them in a trap. You can probably see why Luigi's Mansion 3 reminds me of this. Not to mention that game had a lot of destructible stuff in the environment, which this game also has. But the combat in Ghostbusters is much better because there's more skill involved in catching ghosts. You have to damage them first, and even when slamming them, you still have to be careful of other ghosts attacking you. It's not just slam, 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 you're done. You have to get them into a trap. Anyways, the extra abilities you have can be used in combat, but most of the time they aren't necessary. I hardly ever use the plunger against them. The dark light is only really used to see them when invisible, and not to get them to remove whatever's protecting them. Luigi can be used to deal more damage if used simultaneously to slam a ghost, but it's a bit cumbersome to bring them out in the middle of combat, and it's already easy to catch ghosts anyway. And while the burst has more utility in getting ghosts off you and some other things, you can't use it to dodge attacks in the same way jumping worked in Dark Moon. You'd think you could do that, but no. But we've only looked at half the combat. Now let's look at these new ghosts. They are pretty similar to how Dark Moon's ghosts are. They're much less aggressive than the originals, and they fill similar roles. The goobs are the greenie equivalent, not very aggressive and very simple to take out. Just like the greenies, they can use weapons or wear something to protect themselves from your strobe bulb, but they don't quite do it as often, and it's a lot simpler to deal with them. For some of them in Dark Moon, you'd have to bait them to attack and then you could stun them. There isn't a type of goob like that. Most of the time a burst is enough to get rid of their defenses, and if not that, then sucking it off their face will work. Or better yet, slamming another ghost into them will get rid of anything they have. The greenies were just better when it came to the extra stuff they can do. Also, the mummy enemies are back, and they work exactly like they did in Dark Moon. Next enemy is the hammer, which is basically just this game's version of the slammers. Instead of having a medium-range clap attack, the hammers just charge at you. While charging, they can't be stunned. When you stun them, you have to go behind them to start sucking them up. Next are the oozers. These guys are basically the hiders. They hide in furniture and throw things at you. You need to interact with the furniture to get them out. Although they can throw stuff at you while not hiding, but they move around more. The slinkers are equivalent to the sneakers. Are you noticing a pattern yet? These guys like to stay invisible. They'll occasionally attack, but most of the time they prefer to just annoy you by interrupting what you're doing. Instead of scaring you, they'll grab onto you, which you use the burst to get rid of them. It's also a bit tougher to catch them, as when you start sucking, they'll start to crawl away, and unless you're really close to them, they can get away quite easily. And then there's the trappers, which you only find like 5 in the entire game. Similar concept to the creepers, except instead of hiding on the floor, they hide near walls and doors. You can see them if you're paying enough attention, but most of the time you won't see them coming. Especially with how rare they are, you won't be expecting them. If it catches you, all you need to do is bring out Luigi and flash it, then the both of you suck on its tongues and slam it once to get rid of it. And well, that's about it for the normal ghosts. Well, okay, there are the mini goobs and mini hammers, but they hardly count. You just flash them and suck them up, no tug of war. And there are possessed trash cans and chests, but they're very easy to deal with. Just use the plunger on the trash can to knock them over and use the dark light, and for the chests, bring out Luigi to jump in its mouth and once again use the dark light. Geez, even Luigi's Mansion has mimics. But aside from them, there are exactly the same amount of normal ghosts as in Dark Moon. And if you saw my Dark Moon review, you know that enemy variety was a bit of an issue there. Now overall, this game isn't quite as hurt by the lack of enemy variety because of the boss ghosts, which I'll get into later. But when it comes to the standard combat, there just isn't enough normal ghosts. Combat becomes pretty repetitive, and not helping is how the ghosts are spread out. Now they don't front load it like Dark Moon where you see every type of ghost in the first 2 locations. Instead it takes a bit longer to see every type of ghost. But this means it takes longer for combat encounters to get some more variety. You fight so many damn goobs and hardly fight the other types. At the end of my second playthrough, which was a 100% playthrough, and these numbers are pretty similar to my first playthrough, which was also a 100%, I fought only 28 hammers, 24 oozers, 30 slinkers, 5 trappers, and 45 mini hammers. But the number of goobs was 221. And as for the mini goobs, it was 276. See what I mean? They probably could have made better use out of the few enemy types if they used them much more often. I've already proven I can fight goobs even in large numbers. Why not throw in some other types? Dark Moon also had this problem. But you know what didn't? The first game. For one, that game had more normal ghost types, and it wasn't afraid to use any of them past the gold ghosts. There were very few combat encounters with just gold ghosts and nothing else. There was a lot more mixing of ghost types in the original, which kept the combat fresh. The first game also benefited from being pretty short, so the combat never got repetitive. But for this game to be much longer and have fewer ghost types, yeah, that's a bit of an issue. The issue, I think, is the goobs are considered to be the only standard enemy, while the others are, I guess, special enemies. Like how enemies like Mr. Bones or the elemental ghosts in the first game were not fought often at all because they're special types of ghosts. But if that's the case, then they should have made more standard enemy types. Like the first game had 3 tiers of the normal attacking ghost: Gold Ghost, Purple Puncher, and Blue Twirler. They do have their own properties, but work under the same concept of move close to Luigi and attack. Then you have the more specialized ones, like the Grabbing Ghosts, which interrupt you, Garbage Can Ghosts, which leave banana peels around, Ghost Guys, who you need to remove the mask, plus they don't attack if they have a dance partner, and Mr. Bones, who throws projectiles. But the original still used the specialized ghost often, and this added a lot of variety to the encounters by having a large number of different combinations of ghosts. This is something 3 really needed, not fighting a bunch of goobs yet again. But another issue is, just like Dark Moon, combat is really easy, and it's more to do with the catching mechanics rather than the ghost design, since while I think the goobs and trappers are downgraded from the greenies and creepers, the hammers, oozers, and slinkers are better than their Dark Moon counterparts. There's a little more to them. But the slamming mechanic just makes it really easy to avoid getting hit. You can even stop a charging hammer by slamming another ghost on it. You know, I complained about Dark Moon being too easy, but I at least did die a few times on my initial playthrough, and died to the 3 sisters in my review. But here across my 2 playthroughs, plus all the multiplayer I played, not once have I died to any combat encounter. The only deaths I ever had were from environmental hazards. Look, I'm not going to pretend the first game was hard. That game was also easy, but it was the right kind of easy where you still had to try, and getting good at it felt rewarding. And Dark Moon, and especially 3, are even easier, which makes the combat less engaging. I'm not saying the game should have been 3DS Hidden Mansion difficulty, although that would have been cool as an option, but it should at least match the original. At the very least, the combat is the worst part of the game. Everything else has been improved from Dark Moon, mainly the structure. In Dark Moon, you had 5 mansions that were each divided between missions. This mission structure was quite annoying with how often you'd be interrupted and sent back to the lab for a text dump. It also gave the game a bit of a more restrictive feeling when it came to exploration, when parts of the mansion you've been to were locked off for the mission, and it led to a bit of a backtracking issue with starting in the same place for multiple missions, meaning you'll be going through the same places multiple times in a short amount of time. Not to mention several missions felt like a waste of time since you don't really make progress, or something you need to progress is taken away and the next mission is just getting that back. It had its issues, but Luigi's Mansion 3 does away with it, and it only benefits from it. Although this game isn't quite like the first game either with its structure. In that game, it was all about clearing each individual room one by one, slowly unlocking more of the mansion. This game is somewhere in between the first 2 games. You have a single big location that you slowly unlock more of, but it's separated into floors that are isolated from the rest of the hotel. These floors could be looked at like a combination of the individual missions from Dark Moon and the different areas in the original, those being the collection of rooms you go through until you reach the boss. Each floor is a collection of rooms that lead to the boss ghost, but instead of each room needing to be cleared out to get a key to the next room, going through these floors is more like going through missions in Dark Moon, but without all the fluff. Okay, let's just start at the beginning. The first floor you have access to is Basement 1, which after saving Egad is the location of his lab. Don't worry though, as you won't be going back here all that often, at least not against your will. There are a couple times you get told to go down to the lab, but it's usually for something important like getting Luigi installed, so it's not an issue at all. At any point you can just take the elevator down to go here for whatever reason, and not too long into the game you are given a device that allows you to teleport to the lab in your pause menu, and when you're done it puts you where you were before, which is pretty convenient. Also, after the first time you come here, he gives you this game's version of the Game Boy Horror / Dual Screen, the Virtual Boo. And it's pretty funny that they reference the Virtual Boy here. Not to mention, it gives your pause menu a very nice color scheme. As for what's in the lab, you have your typical menu stuff like options, a way to get into the multiplayer modes, etc. You can talk to Egad for some advice, I think. I hardly ever talked to him since I never really needed to, although you can call him in the pause menu for the same thing. He will still call you on occasion, but not nearly as often as Dark Moon, and when he does, it's usually for something important. Although one slightly annoying thing is he will sometimes call you without interrupting you like this. It's nice that it doesn't stop you, but it's usually just telling you to go somewhere when I'm trying to explore. However, you can turn these hints off, so it's not even an issue. Back to the lab, there's also a shop where you can spend your money. Once again, this place is loaded with money. You get coins, bills, and gold bars again, but also pearls, which are the most valuable. There are also the gold goobs, basically like the speedy spirits and gold greenies from the previous games. They give you a lot of money. And again, you have various critters and gold critters to give you money as well. Anyways, in Dark Moon, money was used to purchase upgrades to your poltergust. It was a neat feature that made getting money meaningful, even though half the upgrades were pointless, and you could quickly get all of them to make money worthless. This is something that could have been improved upon here, but there is no upgrade system at all here. Instead, you have this shop where you can buy a few things. A gold bone, which like Dark Moon will revive you on the spot if you die. They're only found here instead of inspecting the furniture. And when Egad first opens the shop, he gives you one for free, which I never needed. At least not for enemy encounters. You can also buy a boo finder, which will point out where a boo is on the map, and a gem finder, which will point out where a gem is on the map. And that's it. That's all there is to buy in the shop. That's kinda lame. I mean, the gem finder can be useful, although the boo finder is pretty pointless, but I'll get to that in a bit. It's nice that it exists, I guess. It's kinda like paying to find the location of a moon in Mario Odyssey, and I'm fine with that there, but I was hoping there would be more to buy here. Even if they didn't want the upgrade system back, maybe have some purchasable cosmetics like how Odyssey did to bring that game back up. Being able to change how Luigi looked would have been great. Maybe even change how the poltergust looked. Well, this isn't the only purpose for money, actually. Just like the first game, the amount of money you get determines what rank you get at the end, and the higher your rank, the bigger the hotel will be. And I got an A rank on both playthroughs. As far as I could tell, that is the highest rank, and there is no S rank. I mean, I like this ranking system much more than Dark Moon's, and I don't have a problem at all with it coming back. I like that it came back. Just, I think there could have been more use for the money, especially since this is a much longer game than the original. It wasn't really an issue that the only point of the money was the rank at the end there because of how short it is. But here, you're collecting money for a longer span of time just for it to not do anything but give you a rank at the end. Anyways, last thing of note in the lab is the gallery, which you can use to view the ghosts you captured and the gems. The gems are the main collectible, just like last time. Each floor has 6 of them, and they can be pretty well hidden, but most of them can be gotten by just paying attention to the environment and using all your tools. There are some obtuse gems here and there. The only ones I really had an issue with is this one in a vending machine, because you need to use the strobe bulb multiple times to get it, even though pretty much every other strobe bulb switch only needs to be flashed once. And if you destroy that vending machine, you can't get the gem until it respawns when you leave the floor. And there's this one in the gym where once again you need to flash this radio multiple times. But other than that, I don't have much of an issue with how these are hidden. With a few exceptions, you can get every gem on every floor on your first visit. Now for the other major collectible. The boos. They are sort of a combination of the boos from the first 2 games. There's one on each floor like how there was one per mission in Dark Moon, but to find them you have a boo radar of sorts like in the original. Instead of a flashing light on the Game Boy Horror, the controller will vibrate when close to a boo, and also the goo will start gyrating in your poltergust. You have to follow the vibrations, and it can be a bit difficult telling where the strongest vibration is coming from, especially if there are multiple objects close together. Now it's important to figure out where the boo is, because if you are in the room that it's in, and if you inspect the wrong object, he will come out and turn into bats, which means he's moved to a different part of the floor, and you have to find him again. You need to inspect the exact object he's in to be able to catch him. Now, it's a bit annoying when he gets away, especially on the bigger floors, but that encourages you to get it right the first time, and I much prefer this method to the way it worked in Dark Moon, where you just shine the dark light everywhere hoping to find a boo. Now, once you found a boo, catching it is basically the same as in Dark Moon. Use the dark light to stun it, then you can catch it. But instead of launching it, you slam it really fast. Jeez, Luigi hates these things. Now, there is one pretty annoying issue regarding the boos. You can't get them on your first visit to the floor. Actually, I think you also can't get them anytime you have to backtrack through a floor. You can only get them by going back later when nothing is happening on that floor. It would be one thing if they only appeared after beating the boss, since you'd at least still be on the floor. I don't see why it's like this. What would having the boo be there on your first visit take away from the game? It's not a huge deal, but when going for all of them, it's a bit annoying. Now, in addition to those, there are also achievements to get. It's your typical stuff like the various combat challenges, collecting all the stuff, etc. Each floor has a specific achievement different from the rest. Nothing too complicated, but it's nice to have. Now, what do you get for collecting all this stuff? Well, for getting all the gems, you can change your plunger into a crystal plunger. For getting all the boos, you get a boo flashlight. And for getting all the achievements, you get a gold poltergust. Well, that's a bit underwhelming. I mean, it's nice and all, but not all that special. Look, I'm not one to complain about not getting something substantial for completing games. Just it would be nice if it was a little better when you do get something. There's also the issue that progress for the gems, boos, and achievements are tied to the save file, and as far as I can tell, there isn't any kind of New Game Plus, meaning you can't even use these unlockables on a new game. It's pretty much only the multiplayer where you'll even get to use them. To talk about the general gameplay, as I said, the basic structure is getting to a floor, exploring the floor, dealing with any ghosts and solving puzzles along the way, fighting the boss at the end, and then getting an elevator button used to access another floor. Similarly to Dark Moon, there's more emphasis on puzzles than the first game, and while nothing is too brain-taxing, I find the puzzle solving to be much more interesting here than in Dark Moon. A lot of that is down to Luigi. You get a lot of use out of him and in some pretty creative ways. There are a couple times where you escort a toad, but you don't do as much with them as in Dark Moon. It's usually just walking back to the elevator. Although the time you have to go back to the boiler works, you do use him to break down some walls and bounce him up here. Also, slinkers can pick them up like the sneakers in Dark Moon, but instead of just using them as a shield, they can take the toad through a portal, which acts like a death, but it only happens like once or twice. And as for the Polter Pup, well, he's friendly this time, so you don't have to worry about him stealing your stuff. However, that doesn't mean something else doesn't take his place. After getting this elevator button, a rat takes it from you, and then you get it back only for another rat to take it. And then there are two other occasions where you're putting an elevator button in, only for the Polter Kitty to take it away. And just like Polter Pup, you have to chase it down in areas you've just completed. It will run around the floor you're on, then go one floor down. It would be one thing if it went several floors down to a floor you haven't been to in a while, but it does the latest 2 floors you've done, so it's rather annoying. Also, you sort of have to fight it, but it's really easy, just use Luigi. Now, while I don't like that this is here, I don't mind it as much as the Polterpup missions. Likely because it doesn't have the mission structure, so it doesn't feel like a lot of time is being wasted. The thing that made Polterpup annoying was it would take up an entire mission. 1/5 of a mansion would be finding Polterpup. So while it's still padding, it doesn't feel like it's taking up gameplay that could be for something more interesting. Plus, these might be a bit shorter. Haven't timed them, but they at least didn't feel as long. Actually, talking about the floors themselves, I won't go into detail on all of them, but we've got quite a variety in sizes, shapes, and mechanics. Some floors are pretty small, with a few basically just being boss fights, and some are rather large. Some are straightforward, like the RIP suites, but then you have the hotel shops, which require you to keep exchanging keys in each shop that you can only enter as Luigi. Or Paranormal Productions, which is kinda like a smaller version of the Treacherous Mansion from Dark Moon. And that was my favorite part of that game, so I can't complain. You have the center area with teleporters, leading to 4 rooms where you need to bring items from one area to another to solve puzzles. They also do some cool stuff with the movie studio theme, where you look through a camera and suddenly see all the effects that will be added later, and you use Luigi to interact with it. This place kinda stumped me a bit on my first playthrough. It's all about figuring out what objects interact with what. Each floor has something unique about it, so it's always fresh even if the combat gets repetitive. I don't really have much to complain about with the floors. I guess if I had to pick a least favorite, it would be the garden suites, but not even because I dislike it, or because it's not a very backtrack friendly floor. It's a bit annoying trying to get the boo here since it's so vertical, and this is one one of the floors you need to go after the Polterkitty in. I've heard some people complain about the boiler works, but I didn't have an issue with it really. Most of it, you're on this flotation device and using the Poltergust to move through the water, while also using Luigi to open paths. I like this floor. I guess some people had a bit of trouble controlling Luigi, but I found it to be pretty simple. The tomb suites are pretty good. You have this open desert area covered in sand that you can suck up and move around with the Poltergust. There's plenty of stuff to find here, and I sucked up every bit of sand here. Gotta make sure I got everything. Most of this place is down here where you have these 3 rooms with challenges you must overcome to move on. And these rooms are the only times in the game I died. They aren't necessarily hard, but you have a time limit for them, so if you don't figure out what to do quickly, it can get messy. When you first get to the spectral catch, you can't progress until you get an upgrade for the Poltergust. It's the only time you do this, and to get it you need to go back through the boiler works. It is another instance of backtracking, but at least you do go through new areas, so it's not that bad. The upgrade you get is the Super Suction, which can only be used in specific places. But when you do, this happens. This is the only required use for it though. Any other time is optional stuff. But anyways, there isn't too much left to say about these floors without going into detail on each one, which I don't think is necessary. I may have sounded quite harsh with this game for a few aspects of it, mainly the combat. But when it comes to the general gameplay outside of combat, it is quite good. The exploration and puzzle solving is pretty satisfying and definitely an improvement over Dark Moon. There really isn't much to complain about. At the end of each floor is a boss ghost. Yeah, each floor gets a different and unique boss. There's none of that possessor stuff from Dark Moon, thankfully. These can be compared to the portrait ghosts, but they are still very different. The portrait ghosts were largely about figuring out how to catch them. Once you figured out how to expose the heart, it was pretty much over. There wasn't much of a fight for most of them. There are obviously exceptions like the twins or the Clockwork Soldiers, but you get the idea. The bosses here are more aggressive in that they actually attack you. They are way better than Dark Moon's bosses. We don't have a random turret boss or a boring puzzle boss or a mook rush. Just you and the boss, and you need to figure out how to make it vulnerable. Some of these are pretty simple. In fact, a few of these might be more accurately described as mini-bosses. But as the game goes on, they get more complex. Usually the ones guarding a toad tend to be much grander in scale. Amadeus Wolfgeist is the first of what I'd call the major bosses. He kinda has similarities to the possessors actually. He possesses a piano and attacks you with it, but it's much better executed here than in Dark Moon. There's a lot more to this fight. You dodge chairs, deal with some ballerina moves, dodge the piano and shockwaves, avoid the piano keys being shot at you, and throw bombs inside so you can slam the piano down. Damn, Luigi, you could practically suplex a piano, but you need Luigi's help for a couch? Honestly, Amadeus might be my favorite boss ghost. It's not the hardest fight, but it's the first really cool one, and I love his personality and how angry he gets. Some of the other ghosts will also act similar to the possessors, like possessing a mound of sand and a pirate ship. This sand one kinda gave me trouble the first time. Not because the fight is hard, because I was being an idiot and for some reason didn't think that to beat the boss made of sand, in the area all about sucking up sand, you had to suck up all the sand it was made of. But as for the pirate ship, man, this one is quite something. Like, I would have been more than happy to get a pirate ghost, but they stepped it up and gave us a pirate shark. Well, on his first stage, it was a bit dodgy getting the bombs in his mouth. This fight overall is quite the spectacle. Can't say I dislike any of these guys. I've heard some complaints for Clem, that it was difficult to figure out how to beat him, but I figured it out right away. It's quite simple. Leave Luigi up here, bait him to attack, then launch him into the spikes and use Luigi to actually catch him. But we've got a good selection here, and most are pretty satisfying to figure out how to deal with. Morty's is pretty cool. You don't fight him, but you act out fighting a Godzilla-type monster played by one of the goobs. And this really reminds me of that one level in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal where you play out a couple scenes from Secret Agent Clank, a show within that game's universe that Clank stars in. You even have a giant battle in a model city. Oh, and then you fight a T-Rex skeleton. And I love the lead up to it where you can see it, but it moves every time lightning strikes. Helen Gravely is the penultimate boss, and she's got a pretty good fight. There are these laser barriers that you need Luigi to go beneath the floor to deactivate so Luigi has enough room to fight Helen, so you're constantly having to switch between them. Unfortunately, King Boo's fight isn't all that interesting. It's similar to his Dark Moon fight in a few ways, but you're mostly waiting for him to throw bombs so you can throw them back. It is kinda cool when he splits into 2 and later 3 and you can tell which one is real by his teeth, and at the end there's a time limit, but you have plenty of time to beat him. It's not bad, just could be better. I really think it's a missed opportunity not having Mario with you during this fight. It could have been pretty cool having them work together. Not entirely sure how that could work. Maybe you can't do anything to King Boo while he has his crown on, and Mario would remove the crown for you. Just a suggestion. One other thing this game has over Dark Moon with the bosses are phases. In Dark Moon you had 3 phases to each of these bosses with no way to speed it up, which is okay, a lot of bosses are like that, but in the original how much health you shaved off the bosses was determined by your own skill rather than being the set amount of health that is lost. 3 sort of goes back to the first game's method. While you might be tempted to start slamming them as soon as the meter fills up, if you hold off and just keep draining their health and wait until they're about to break free before slamming them, you can defeat them quite quickly. It's not quite as hard as one cycling Bogmire, but it's still much appreciated. Although I think for the bigger bosses their health will increase a bit so you do have a set amount of phases. Unfortunate, but not a big deal. The bosses are kind of the highlight of the game, and definitely the best part of the combat. Sure, you still have to slam them, but that's after you've exposed them, and not just all of what fighting them is like. Probably the biggest issue with these bosses is how much they don't want you to die. Some of these could have been rather tough if they didn't constantly give you health back. I did get close to death on a couple of these fights, but there's always some health around to make sure you don't. Honestly, this game really could have used a hidden mansion to spice up the difficulty. Please, it was so refreshing when the 3DS hidden mansion kicked my ass. I want some difficult Luigi's Mansion, and not one restricted to the 3DS. There is no downside to having a hidden mansion. The game only stands to benefit from it. Well anyways, with all that said, the only thing left to talk about is the multiplayer. This game has co-op for the main story. Player 2 can control Luigi, which is neat. It's definitely more justified here than the 3DS version of the original. I haven't done a full playthrough like this, but I doubt there would be much to add on to it anyways. But there are also 2 other multiplayer modes, Scarescraper and Scream Park. Let's start with Scream Park since I don't have much to say about it. Scream Park is basically just 3 minigames. One where you catch ghosts to get more points than the other team. Very simple, not much to say on it. One where you use these cannons to break targets to get points. This one is more interesting since you need to time the shots right, and you also might want to take away cannonballs from the other team. And the last one is collecting money while on these inner tubes. Get more money to win. But if your tube breaks, you lose all your money. And that's it. That's all that's in Scream Park. Not very interesting, just a distraction really. Although I didn't exactly get the full experience with this mode is designed to be played with up to 8 players. I was only able to play it with 1 other person. Maybe this is super fun with 8 players, but I can't say, and perhaps I could have just gone online to get the 8 players, except it's local only. You know, Nintendo, I'm not sure if you're aware, but getting 8 people together to play a few minigames isn't exactly a common thing that happens. But yeah, not much to say on that. Let's just get into the Scarescraper, which returns from Dark Moon. This version of Scarescraper is both expanded upon the version in Dark Moon, but also more simplified. In Dark Moon, you had 3 modes. Hunt, which you would just need to catch every ghost on the floor. Polterpup, where you need to track down and catch all the Polterpups on the floor. And Rush, where you needed to find the exit in a limited amount of time. In addition to that, you can have 5 to 25 floors. 3 only has 1 version, but the goal of the floors can be a few different things. You also only have the option of 5 or 10 floors. But backing up a bit, the goal of the Scarescraper is to clear out each floor until you reach the top and fight the main boss ghost. Each floor has a 5-minute time limit. If you run out of time, you fail and have to start over. Each floor is made up of a collection of different room types and hallways in a random arrangement. And as said before, the goal of the floor can be one of few different types. The most common one is capture the ghosts. It's just as it sounds, you need to find and capture every ghost on the floor. The amount of ghosts vary, and what kinds of ghosts can appear can vary. Sometimes the only kinds of ghosts you'll fight are the mini ones. There's also Find the Toads. There are 4 toads on the floor, and you need to find each one of them and escort them back to the starting point. For this, it's best to get all of them back at once to save the most time, but if you find a toad close to the exit, it may be better to drop him off, since if you enter a room with ghosts with a toad, the toad will get scared and you'll need to catch all the ghosts before he'll follow you again. Generally, it's best to avoid catching ghosts unless you need to. One annoying thing is when having the toads go through the exit, it's a bit slow and time still goes down, so you can fail even if the last toad is entering the thing. Next is defeat the crows. This is pretty much the same as capture the ghosts, but instead you fight crows. Nothing really to say about it. And the last one is collect the money. You just go around getting all the money you can find while fighting gold goobs to get even more money until you get the required amount. Another annoying thing is every time you clear a room, Luigi does this fist pump animation, which will interrupt anything you're doing, like trying to use the vacuum, and it's especially annoying during the collect the money floor, since defeating a gold goob will trigger this animation, but defeating it also spawns money. Sure, it's not a huge deal, but it's still annoying. I'll say I definitely like this system better than how Dark Moon did it. There's more variety in a single playthrough, which keeps it interesting. Plus, there's no rush mode. I didn't like the strict time limit, although I find the 5-minute time limit for any floor here to be a bit short, especially for fighting toads. And the way running works in this game, where you start out walking and after a few seconds you start going faster, is kind of annoying when you're running out of time and you wish you'd just always be going at top speed. Although you can get time extensions from catching ghosts or in furniture, so at least there's that. There are also some other differences from Dark Moon. After completing a floor, you just go to the next floor. In Dark Moon, you had a red coin collecting minigame where 4 of them appeared and you had a short amount of time to collect them. If you got them all, one player could get a power-up for the next floor, but that's not here. Power-ups are only found during the floors, usually hidden in furniture. You have stuff like a map which shows you the entire layout of the floor as well as where the ghosts are. Plus you could see a hidden room that has all the power-ups in it, including an upgrade for the poltergust which does more damage as well as lets you start slamming right away. There's also a strobe bulb upgrade that, when fully charged, stuns every ghost in the room. This is very useful when having to hunt down the crows. The dark light goggles also return, showing you invisible objects and ghosts, and very rarely you can find a Starman that makes you briefly invincible and you instantly defeat ghosts on contact. It is pretty rare though. And the last power-up is a siren on your head that lights up around traps. Like Dark Moon Scarescraper, there are traps you can get stuck in requiring help from another player to get out of. A carpet that eats you, and fake doors. You can easily detect the carpets by looking at them, just to make sure you pay attention to where you're going because it's a bit too easy to keep your eyes on the map and walk into them. And be careful taking corners as they can blindside you. As for the doors, you can tell by looking at the map or by seeing if they have a doormat. If they don't, they're fake. If you spot them, you can just destroy them so you won't have to worry about them. But if you're running out of time, it might be best to just ignore them. There are some differences in how these traps function from Dark Moon. First up, while other players can still help you out of them, if you're stuck for about 30 seconds, you'll be let out automatically. So if you aren't close to another player and time is running out, it may be best to wait instead of wasting time getting the other player to help. Although if you're playing with 4 players, it seems to never let you go without another player helping. But also because of this, these traps appear even if you're playing by yourself, which they didn't in Dark Moon. Be very careful. It really sucks being low on time trying to get the toads back as quickly as possible only to fail because you stepped on a carpet. Sometimes in the middle of a floor, one of 2 events can happen. One being the lights shut off with your map being disabled for a few seconds. And the map does come back, but the only way to turn the lights back on is by finding a closet and flashing the switch. The other thing that could happen is your poltergust gets teleported somewhere else and you have to get it back. That latter one is much more annoying because there's nothing you can do about it. At least with the blackout, you don't need to fix it. You could just keep going with the lights out. You just need to be more careful with traps. But when your poltergust gets stolen, you need to stop what you're doing and get it back, which wastes a lot of time. Every 5 floors, you'll fight a boss ghost. Although if you only have 5 floors, the 5th floor is the roof, and the boss up there is always the same. To get the other boss ghost, you'll need to select 10 floor, which is annoying. But the 5th floor boss can be a special version of one of the standard ghosts with extra health and some other ability, like speed, bombs, or health regen. There are far less of these guys compared to the boss ghosts in Dark Moon Scarescraper, which is actually a good thing because there are only 5 of them there, but with a bunch of reskins, which made trying to get them all very annoying. Here, while they lack visual variety, they are at least different from each other, and it's not nearly as much of a pain in the ass to get them all. Although one annoying thing about Floor 5 is you can't actually fight the boss until you find the key, which just wastes your time. Now on the roof you fight Boolasis, which was pretty cool when I first saw it. Glad they're calling him Boolasis again, although he does have the same issue that the Brain did, where he's the only fight on the top. So if you only really wanted to do 5 floors, you'd always fight him, unless you pick 10 and stop at 5. Anyways, the fight itself doesn't have anything on the original Boolasis. First of all, this fight is pretty similar to King Boo. It has its differences, but it's still lame. To beat him, you have to wait until he spits out bombs so you can throw them back, but you need to put as many as you can in so when he separates, they stay stunned longer so you can catch more. This fight is kinda annoying, mostly because of the time limit. Having a time limit wouldn't have been so bad on its own, if not for how long it takes him to become vulnerable. He has like 5 different attack phases, and the more booze you take away, the more he does before dropping the bombs, and it really gets tedious waiting when the time is ticking. And this is a nearly 8-minute fight when solo. The lowest I got it was 6 minutes and 15 seconds, but it was only twice in the playthroughs I recorded that I had it under 7 minutes. Normally I'm not one to complain about long bosses, but they have to be interesting, and having you wait so long to deal damage, while also having a time limit, just takes away any enjoyment I can have from this fight. The original Boolossus still reigns supreme. Overall, I would say the Skyscraper is an improvement to the one in Dark Moon, and playing with other people does make it even better. I actually was able to play with others this time, but like the Dark Moon Skyscraper, it just kinda gets old after a while. Sure, there's more room variety, more variety in objectives, less repetitive mid-bosses, and it's just in general more interesting, but after a few playthroughs, you've seen it all, and it's not particularly fun playing solo after the first few runs. I did a lot of solo runs, and I'm tired of playing it. Honestly, I think the time limit is the most draining part of it for me. I like taking my time in games, and I really like exploring. I don't like being rushed and having to go fast at all times. Going fast can be pretty fun for me if it's not forced on me, and it really discourages exploring as much as I'd like to, because most of the time, if I go to explore the rooms, all I'll find is money, which is only for score, which is pointless when solo, so I risk running out of time. This mode was obviously balanced for multiple players, and I can't fault it for that, but at the same time, if you're going to give me the option for solo play, it'd be nice if you could at least give me a couple more minutes to work with. But that's about all I have to say on the Skyscraper. It can be pretty fun if you bring in 3 friends for a couple rounds, but it gets really tiring after a while, especially solo. Doubt I'll be playing much more of it. Now there actually will be some multiplayer DLC for this game, so there will be some more stuff here. I doubt I'll make a follow-up video going over it unless it's something substantial. I doubt I'll even buy it unless it's something substantial, but I thought I'd at least mention it. And well, that's it for Luigi's Mansion 3. Man, this game is pretty conflicting for me. As mentioned numerous times, I love the original game, and it saddens me that they won't go back to that game's atmosphere and satisfying combat. At least with Dark Moon, in addition to it being different from the original, it also had quite a few issues with combat, enemy variety, and the mission structure. But with Luigi's Mansion 3, it is still not what I wanted, but it doesn't have many issues really. Part of me likes this game, I really do. But part of me is still disappointed because this further cements that I'll never get to see those things I loved in the original ever again. I can't say it's bad, because it isn't. I can't say it's just alright like with Dark Moon, because it's more than just alright. I can't even say I don't like the game because I did really enjoy my time playing this game, and unlike Dark Moon, I can see myself revisiting this game from time to time. Now that's still yet to be seen, but I had no issue playing it for a second time for this review. I think the best way to sum up what I think about this game is it's bittersweet. Bitter in that a lot of what I love about the first game is gone and looks like it's not coming back. But sweet in that what we got is still pretty good. It's not quite what I want, and it's said that I may never get what I want, but it still satisfies in other ways, even if it's not quite as filling. I've heard some people say this game is the perfect middle ground between the first game and Dark Moon, but I don't really see how. First off, this game is closer to Dark Moon than the original. Sure, it does take some stuff from the first game, but not enough to be a perfect balance. And even if it was perfectly in the middle, why would a middle ground between two conflicting styles be a good thing? Because that just sounds like it wouldn't satisfy either side. Now, I don't think this game would dissatisfy Dark Moon fans, unless they really like the mission structure or all the dialogue with the Egad, but this game definitely doesn't satisfy those who crave something more like the original. It can't be a perfect middle ground if one side isn't completely satisfied. It does satisfy in other aspects, but it doesn't scratch the itch that wants something more like the first game. There's not a whole lot to complain about other than not getting something more like the first game though. The only real issue is the combat, but that's about it for big issues. All other issues are small. I do think the combat prevents this game from reaching masterpiece status, but it doesn't stop it from being a pretty damn good game. This game does greatly improve from Dark Moon in many aspects. The boss ghosts are great, the exploration is fun and satisfying, and the puzzles are the best they've ever been. It also has a good length to it, not too short, not too long. This game is pretty good. Probably even great, but it still doesn't quite reach the first game. Overall, the first game is still the best. It's the one with the least flaws. It doesn't have any padding issues aside from mild backtracking near the end, which is handled pretty well regardless. It has the best enemy variety, the most technical and skill-oriented combat, the smoothest controls, and an amazing atmosphere with real personality, tension, suspense, and mystery. Dark Moon had issues with pacing, backtracking, the combat, and bosses. And this game has issues with the combat and a few other smaller stuff. But the original is solid throughout, with no standout issues. It's obviously not perfect. I don't want to give that impression, as I know some people get pissy when they think people are saying a game is perfect, especially when praising an older game and not completely being satisfied with the new one. But that's more of a problem with a certain other series. But that's it for the Luigi's Mansion trilogy. I am now completely done with it, at least until Luigi's Mansion 4 is announced, which at this point I don't have a reason to believe it won't happen eventually. And now it's time to get back to the Paper Mario Marathon. Can't leave that hanging. I just needed to get this out of the way first. So next review is actually going to be Super Paper Mario. I'll see you there.
Nice to invite us over to the hotel, hey Luigi?
Uh-oh, back to the lab again. Oh no, back to the lab again. We messed up. Back to the lab again. Not again. Back to the lab again. Uh-oh, back to the lab again. Oh no, back to the lab again. We messed up. Back to the lab again. Not again. Back to the lab again.
Hey, thanks for watching, and thank you to my patrons IKG Productions, Morpho, and the SideQuest Gamer. Greatly appreciate the support, and if any of you enjoy my content, please consider supporting me on Patreon.